Sabina, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, the path that sort of led you to your company, Hello World, the inspiration behind founding it, the entire enchilada?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have a story like many immigrant families. My family moved from India at a young age. We lived in Queens, New York for many years. Uh, you know, grew up in a low income household. But education was kind of a theme of ours growing up. It was always emphasized in my family, even though we didn't necessarily have great role models who had gone far in education. We always understood and knew that this was the key not only to success in your life, but really living a life of higher consciousness and understanding. Um, I even remember my parents being like, not only are you going to college, you're going to grad school, and they didn't have, grad degrees. A lot of my family members had not gone to college. So that's a little bit about my upbringing. In terms of Hello World, to be really honest, I wasn't one of those individuals that was like, this is exactly what I want to do. I'm going to go for this. I had friends in the medical field who knew exactly what they wanted to do, but that was not me. I was one of those students that I was like, I'm going to get straight A's or try to. I want to perform well. I want to impress my parents and make sure they're happy with how I'm doing. But I never had a clear passion or interest that I wanted to pursue until, I think this is pretty late in my life, but I went to grad school, at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I chose the Kennedy School because, when you do public policy, you can be in any sector of public policy. You can be in sustainability. You can be in healthcare, you can be in education, any field. So I'm like, all right, I still have some options here. I took a course. This was the first time when I felt like something struck a chord. For me, I took a class called Entrepreneurship and Education Reform. This was at the business school. And I didn't, honestly, even to this day, I don't really care about the word entrepreneurship. I don't really see myself as an entrepreneur, see myself as an education leader. So that's not why I took that course. But in education reform sounded really interesting to me. We read all of these case studies about, different organizations like Green Dot, KIP, Amplify. There are all these different, nonprofits doing incredible work in education. And I remember reading one in particular called, it was about KIP. So KIP stands for Knowledge is Power program. It's, I think, the largest charter school network in the U.S., something like 80,000 students spread across the U.S., started in Houston, started by a Teach for America alum. And there's a part in that case study, and then, they target, low-income communities, students of color who have been, historically disenfranchised, historically excluded, from some of the most lucrative careers, in our society. And so I read this case study, and there's a part of it that talks about the shared contract. I don't know the exact wording, but it's like everybody signs a contract. The child, the parent, and the teacher. And on the parent contract, it says things like, I commit to, helping my child with homework. I commit to dropping them off every day at this time. I commit to, being aware of how they're doing and how they're performing and being involved in their lives. And I just remember seeing that and just really being moved by the level of involvement by a school in a family personal life. I remember they even did home visits. These school leaders, they They went to families' homes when they first started and got them invested in what they were doing. So different from what I had experienced. I'm like, this sounds incredible. And that's when I was like, oh man, finally, I feel a spark somewhere. I care about this. I want to do this. And I'm not doing it to impress anyone. I'm not doing it because it's the right thing to do. I'm doing it because I want to. And it was a little tricky, honestly, at that time because, when you graduate from the Harvard Kennedy School, you don't think you're going to go and teach, go into education and do, Teach for America in my case, a program I highly respect. Um, at that time, folks that were graduating were going to work for the World Health Organization and the World Bank and the UN, and they're going to go be diplomats and ambassadors and all of these things. And I was like, I'm going in the classroom and I'm going to be working with 30 kids, you know.
That's that's fascinating. And I imagine it sounds like there was a bit of an epiphany that you had when you saw the approach that this school had taken, that education could sort of stray off of the beaten path and take a new, refreshed approach that may resonate a little bit more and engage all of the stakeholders involved in the educational process a little bit more. It sounds like that epiphany sort of was part of what influenced you to eventually move into the educational space.
Absolutely. Yes. I think I felt moved by it. And, I don't reflect on this probably often enough, but having grown up, and I don't love going on a tangent here. I'm not trying to share a sob story, but, we were not well off, especially when I was really young. We lived in a studio apartment, no bedrooms, there was like this wardrobe dividing my parents' room with our room. And we had a mattress on the floor and no bed frames, but I think when I read that case study, a part of me was like, it's really hard to get out of that place. And it's really difficult for parents to have kids in that place. And so, for the first time, I found, what I believe to be one of the greatest challenges of our generation that really struck, a chord within me emotionally. And that's what I think folks should look for, because once you find that, you don't care about how successful you are, how far you go. You're driven by the impact that you're making. And so that was absolutely, the moment for me. And so after that, went into the classroom and I wanted to be on the front lines. It was very obvious to me that I didn't want to just go in and be on the periphery of the education system. I was like, I want to be smack dab in the middle and I want to understand all of those things like pedagogy and like motivation, culturally responsive teaching, socio-emotional learning. I'm like, I want to be able to create that magic myself. I want to like really get in it, and I will tell you, those were the hardest years of my life. It was so challenging. It was so difficult. The students were incredible. I taught in Bed-Stuy, New York, partly because it was close to where I had grown up. Students were incredible. Families were incredible. But we were incredibly under-resourced. And not all students, but most of the students were a year to 2 to 3 years behind in reading and math, and science. And you feel a lot of pressure, right? Like it's on you. What are you going to do to change the trajectory of these students' lives? What are you going to do? I've never worked so hard. I remember I worked 7 days a week. I was the last person out of the school. I literally have so many memories of the janitor, Cheryl, coming to my classroom, being like, Sabina, lock the doors, the heavy metal doors on the way out. And, it's not even allowed. He's like, but I'm not going to stay after you. I left till like at 11 p.m. But when you interface that closely with students living below the poverty line, and you start to really care about them, that's the thing that keeps you up at night. It's your responsibility. What are you going to do? So that is probably the sentiment that I have. I'll share a quick story. It makes me emotional every time I share it, but try to move past it. Basically, I had a student. I won't share his name, but everybody knew that the student had a crush on another student in the other class. Okay. And that other student she was having a birthday party. And so we're all waiting for the student in my class for him to get a birthday card and a birthday invitation. He gets one, right? He gets the birthday invitation. We're all excited. It's like the cutest thing ever. And this was elementary school at the time. So it was fourth grade. And then the Monday after the birthday party, we're standing in line and he's right, next to me. And I asked him, I'm like, hey, how was the birthday party? And he tells me, he said, really casually, as if it's nothing. He goes, oh man, I couldn't go. The bus fare. And then he changes the subject like it's nothing, right? Ah, that was so hard to hear. And there's so many moments like that, right? The bus fare at that time was $1.35. I know that, to get to where he needs to go. But so when you're that close to poverty, and you lived it to some degree, nothing like these students, but to some degree, you, as an education professional, you will continue to ask the question, what am I going to do to change this trajectory of students' lives? And that over time, I have learned, at least from my skill set and from my vantage point, is absolutely computer science. That is the answer. That is like, if our ultimate goal is to place students into positions of power and influence, that's our ultimate goal at Hello World. If it's to place students that have historically been excluded into positions of power and influence, then computer science is a surefire way of doing that, more so than I believe any other subject, because of what computer science, the nature of what that topic is.
Wow, and thank you for sharing such a powerful story. I mean, it sounds it resonates a lot with myself as well. My family immigrated to America from Pakistan when I was around 5 or 6 years old, and we settled down in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and grew up in I think it was a one-bedroom household. So very very similar to your upbringing, and I think in a way it sounds like, and I kind of feel this too, the emphasis on education was a bit of a privilege. Compared to a lot of my extended family, my family had emphasized education a lot more. And then over time, education really became the key that helped us overcome the odds and sort of overcome the obstacles that were keeping us in poverty. And it sounds like you realize that education could be such a powerful key for unlocking a lot of opportunities for these students, and it became seems like the prime focus of your life was making sure that more and more students had that key and were able to find the same experiences and find their way out of those circumstances like you did.
Absolutely. Um, that's great that we share that, because you can empathize with a lot of the upbringing, and with at least some part of what these students are going through. And within education, to me, I think there are people that are doing extraordinary things in math and ELA using technology, but there's work to be done in computer science. There is work to be done, because it is very easy, and I see this time and time again, and it worries me, but it is very easy to make computer science look flashy and edutainment, as some people call it. It's very easy. And, I don't blame them, but school leaders, district leaders, superintendents, they don't know what's rigorous versus what's not. They didn't study computer science. And so there is work to be done. And I hope we're part of the solution.
Absolutely. I'm sure you are, and you will continue to be. And I'm curious, what was the moment that you realized it was computer science that was really going to give these students the best quote unquote return on investment for the time that they're going to be spending learning these extra skills that they may not be learning in their day-to-day schooling? When did you decide to settle on computer science? And was there like a specific moment, or was it just over a period of time that you came to that realization?
I don't think it's a great question. I don't think it was a particular moment for this specifically. I studied math for undergrad and I took a handful of computer science courses. And as you can imagine, Haroon, almost everyone in those classes were white. Almost everybody was male. Um, but I don't think I was as reflective back then. And I didn't, think of computer science as in the way that I do today. And, eventually what I came to learn about computer science just by reading about just industry and leaders, and the types of skills they need to apply, not whether they have a computer science degree or not, but the types of skills you need to apply, you know, in the face of a very complex world. That's where, change is the only norm. You need a set of tools that transcend subject and field of study. And that's what people don't get about computer science. It's that it's not a singular field of study. It is a mindset. It is a mindset of algorithmic and computational thinking that sets you up to problem solve. That's what it is, right? And the more you can interface that ability of computational thinking with other fields of study, the more powerful you become. Like things like, how does climate change, impact my county? I'm thinking of some of the projects we do at Hello World. How prevalent is gerrymandering? What is the impact of social media? And how should we design software to make media recommendation? How quickly will the pandemic spread? How reliable are genetic ancestry tests? I can go on. We have so many different projects like this, but when you use computer science, the tools of computer science, you are getting a tool set that's incredibly powerful, and you're marrying that with like a set of social consciousness tools. If it's done right, which often it is not, but if it's done right, you can marry the two together and basically problem solve around anything. That's what computer science is, and it's just so unfortunate that nowadays it's just gone down to being diluted into coding, which is not computer science. Coding is a means. It's a means to push algorithmic thinking, but it's very much a part of that larger umbrella of what is computer science.
I couldn't agree more with you. And just from my own personal experience, I always considered myself an artistic person growing up. I always considered myself more of I forget if it's the left side of the brain, right side of the brain, but it was the artistic side basically. And I never really thought I could learn how to program. I never really thought I could get into a more technical field. And it was in college that I started trying to learn Python. And for the longest time, I would just try to learn the very basics. Just, I think at that point, I was learning how to build functions in Python. And I was just struggling to wrap my head around it conceptually. And I talked to a lot of folks, and they all told me the same thing. They said, there's going to come a moment when you're learning how to program that it's just going to click. And I didn't believe them. But lo and behold, I pushed through it. I pushed through those obstacles and the difficulty of learning Python. And there was a moment when absolutely it clicked. It seemed like overnight my thinking pattern had changed. I was able to understand how programming actually worked. I know that sounds a bit ambiguous, but that's how it felt in the moment. And I would say that marked a complete transformation in just the way I think about everything. It made me much more logical, much more structured, much more organized. in my thinking processes. And I think it's especially powerful for folks that may not be naturally inclined to think that way. Some folks just get it. They get it at a young age. They can pick up programming, and it just makes sense to them right off the bat. And I think that's great. Those folks can become excellent computer scientists or whatever they choose to be. I think it's especially powerful when somebody that comes from a non-traditional background, non-technical background, somebody with maybe a little bit of an interest in the arts or the humanities, something traditionally non-technical, and they learn how to think in a more programmatic type of way, because then they're able to get a little bit of both. And that combination, I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of impact to be made at that intersection. So it sounds like Hello World, one of the main focuses that your organization is focusing on is making sure that students have a more holistic understanding, because there's kind of a synergistic effect that is realized when you have somebody learn about the logical side of programming as well as some of the more well-rounded aspects.
Yes, 100%. You know, the way I think of it is computer science is the ability to take a large abstract challenge or problem, which looks different to like an 8-year-old, right, than a 35-year-old. But you take a large abstract challenge or opportunity, like you want to start a company, for example, right? You can break it down into 1,000 pieces, sequence them, and tackle one at a time. Now, tell me one scenario that's challenging to figure out where that skill set is not relevant, you know. Um, so I completely agree. There was an analogy that someone gave me. Her name's Chin Chin. She's the head of engineering at a local company here called Ojo Lab. But she said, you know, because sometimes we get pushback. You know, people are like, "Oh, you're teaching coding, right? That's what that is." And we're like, "That's not it. We're not trying to make everyone engineer. That's not what we're trying to do." And she said, you know, the way to think about it is, you know, the code, like painters, if you're getting someone to do a paint job, they know how to code, right? The language changes or the way that you do the job changes, like they have to relearn the skill of coding. But you teach someone computer science and they're the artist. And it doesn't matter what color the paint is, what type of canvas you have. You will figure it out because it's a way of thinking, you know, and I'm so glad you understand this. And but I worry, you know, I worry about how this is not, folks think of computer science as an elective. It is an elective class. It starts in most places, especially low income areas, in high school. Can you imagine starting for the first time in high school? What if you started math in high school? What if the first math class you took was in ninth grade or an elective option? What a disadvantage. And that's what it is. That's the comparison. I say it's the math from 200 years ago. That's what computer science is, you know, and I don't know how quickly we'll get there.
So tell us a little bit more about Hello World. What sort of grades do you interact with the most? How do the operations run? Is it mostly after school based? Do you work with schools and integrate the program with school curriculum? How does it work, and what does your curriculum look like in general?
Yeah. So, big picture, we are a SaaS business that licenses curriculum by student to schools. So just, you know, in plain our text, we have a platform, an online platform, like a Coursera, you know, that we go to schools and we say, this is an end-to-end, rigorous, engaging solution for computer science for 3rd through 12th grade. I think there's a lot of tools off the shelf before 3rd grade, often free, that folks can use. 3rd through 12th grade tools that we go to a school and we say, we'll give you license to a seat, you pay us per student, and then they use it, and then we provide professional development and implementation support. That's what we are today. We teach many different courses. We're in the process, fingers crossed, of being endorsed for the AP courses, CSA, CSP, Computer Science Principles. We teach definitely data science and artificial intelligence. That is easily my favorite course that we offer, easily, because it harnesses the true potential of computer science to be interdisciplinary in a way that other content areas simply cannot, right? You can, all of those questions I listed out, you can do that with data science and AI. It's very difficult to do that with like web development, for example. So, we teach data science AI, we teach those AP courses, we teach iOS mobile app development, VR, a few other courses. But the bottom line is you're using these courses as a medium to teach computer science, computational algorithmic thinking abilities. I will say we did not start that way. We've evolved a ton. If we were talking 5 years ago, I don't think what we had was very impressive. And that's the art of iterating and incremental growth. But yes, that's what we are today.
And how has the business evolved during COVID? I imagine it's forced just about every single business to have to pivot at least slightly. How has Hello World had to adapt to the pandemic and the situation that left students either out of school or working from home taking school from home?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been pros and cons for us. The first is that I'm going to name the biggest pro that I don't know how else this would have happened. This to us is the silver lining of COVID, which is that in the development of the K-12, especially public school system infrastructure for devices and internet has skyrocketed. I mean, something like 60% of schools, public schools, met the FCC's goals around infrastructure or something pre-pandemic. It's like at 91% now. That kind of growth we have never seen. And it is very advantageous for a business like ours and so many other ed tech companies that are, really trying to serve students, teachers, and their families. That has been just huge because in the past, we just went into the SaaS model, but, before the pandemic, when we talk to schools, they say, oh, we don't have one-to-one tech. Not every student has a computer. So can you work in groups? And we're like, not really. So that's been a huge plus for us. The cons, revenue took a hit for sure. We weren't ready with the SaaS platform when COVID first happened. We were running our own program, and I don't blame students, but they got over Zoom pretty quickly. You also can't charge as much, when you're doing an online program. We couldn't do nearly as many events. We did, events at almost every library locally. But back to the last pro I'll share is that it made us accelerate our transition to be a SaaS business much faster because we couldn't do these in-person things. And we had so much more time. You're not driving to and our whole team, right? We're not driving to and from school. For better or for worse, no one's taking a vacation, right? No one took a day off for like a year, and it just made us move towards the SaaS model that we're in today a lot more quickly.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's very interesting how so many industries have evolved and how technology has become so much more widely adopted as a result of the pandemic. And now I want to ask you, obviously technology has eaten the world, especially over the past couple of decades. And I think there's nobody on the planet that can deny the fact that software and technology are taking over the planet and have affected virtually every single aspect of our lives. And I'm curious, why have certain school districts, been so slow to adopt computer science curriculum at a sort of earlier stage? And how has Hello World sort of push to include some of these programs in these students' sort of day to day? How has that worked out? And have you gotten any pushback as a result? Have you gotten more affirmation as a result?
It's such a good question. I'm here listing like, here are all the laundry list of reasons. There's a couple. So I think the main one, and we could talk about this for hours, but if I'm being really honest and boiling it down, the main reason computer science has not been as widely adopted as many people, I mean, parents, school leaders, superintendents, something like 68% of superintendents agree that computer science is a high priority. Computer science has was a major ed tech trending topic, according to EdSurge, in like 2018 or something. They did like a big report on trends in ed tech. But one of the main reasons is that it's not a tested subject, right? So, when the No Child Left Behind legislation passed, it started tying school funding. How much do you get, for operating your school, especially per pupil, to test score results? Not only funding, but the grade of your school. Are you a blue ribbon school? Are you A, B, C school? There's all these different, different states use different things. They're tied to test scores. Now, if you're in an affluent school, not even a private school, but an affluent public school where your parents are educated, you started reading when you were 1 week old, and all of these things, the school's not paying attention to test scores. They just know, like, you'll be fine. It's a pretty well-resourced school. The local property taxes are really high. We're funding all kinds of stuff at the school, right? We have all AP courses, all this stuff. But if you're a low-income school that's losing kids, and when you lose kids, you lose funding, right? Those test scores matter a lot. And so when computer science is nowhere near, nobody tests for computer science, how are schools going to be like, sure, let's put X amount of funding, percentage of funding to computer science, a non-tested subject? You will see less and less of that the lower income the school, right? So that's the main reason. It's not a tested subject. Not saying it should be. I think that whole system can cause for some really strange priorities and decision making. But that's the first thing. Do you have a thought on that?
No, I'm just really curious if that's bound to change. If what your thoughts are on how that's going to evolve in the future.
I don't know, honestly. I don't know if will ever become a core subject because the two main, especially at a national level, tested subjects are math and ELA, not even science and social studies. Like, if you talk to any teacher from a low income school, they will tell you there is a hierarchy of who gets the most resources and where the most sheer minutes in a school day go. And it's something like this: ELA math, science, social studies, and then the electives. It's like art, PE, and computer science is right over here. And I don't know if I ever see computer science becoming a core subject, certainly not in the youngest grades. But that leads me to another piece, which is mandate and funding. When state and local education agencies get funding for something, and mandates. You can't just have mandates. You can't just say every kid is required to blah, blah, blah. You have to say, here's a mandate, and if you do this, we'll pay you, we'll give you funds. When those two things come together, more and more computer science courses get offered. And that is happening. That is trending towards, more and more policies are being passed. I mean, even here in Texas, career and technical education used to be, wood shop and a host of other courses. They just moved computer science. under that to allow for more easy funding. All of a sudden, more schools, middle schools specifically, are offering computer science. So that's happening. I think the two other challenges, and these are, lower on the list, but actually this one's pretty important, is the talent, right? Computer science grads are going to work at TikTok. They're not going in the classroom, right? So what do you do? And these are difficult concepts to teach and be trained in. So there's a real challenge with just recruitment, which is why, at least at Hello World, and I think this is true for a lot of computer science organizations, you don't have to have a computer science background to teach the curriculum. But I will say that the curriculum needs to do a lot of the heavy lifting. It's got to do a lot of the work and allow students to drive their own learning and push, and get to really high levels of rigor without the teacher's knowledge. The students have to be able to surpass the teacher. That's something we talk about often. The students have to be able, will and should surpass you, Miss Johnson. You know what I mean? So that's one thing. And then the last thing, very last thing I'll say is, I don't believe that there's a curriculum out there outside of Hello World that meant for K-12 that harnesses computer science and its abilities the way that it should for a student, with the critical thinking, with the interdisciplinary learning, with the ethics and society component. I don't believe that. I haven't seen it. If I do, I will quit or merge or do something, but I have not seen it. And I think that's really lacking in the space as well.
Gotcha. And in terms of Hello World's interaction with these schools, what sort of schools are you mainly targeting? Is it schools that are receiving funding to pursue computer science programs, that they want to reduce the sort of cost to adoption, and you have a packaged service that you can offer them without the need for them to develop a curriculum on their own? Or are you finding that wealthier schools are looking for something similar? I'm curious what the needs and the wants of the schools that approach you and that work with you are, and how you integrate with those schools.
We want to target low-income schools. So going into this fall, 80% of our student users will be at Title I schools. That's really important to us. Hello World will be
Awesome.
an absolute failure if we don't move the needle for those communities, right? So that's the first thing. We do get the biggest want that I hear from schools is that they want to have a state-of-the-art computer science program faster and for less money. And that's what we're trying to build, right? You should be able to implement this fall, right? We're going to train your teachers. You have it ready to go in this fall. You can tell parents who are leaving your school because it's got a low grade or whatever, that you have a state-of-the-art, world-class computer science program that you are offering. One thing I'll name is that we do get interest from wealthier schools and districts. And I just want to share that, that's a good thing for us. I never understood this dichotomy of certain organizations being only targeting low income schools. It reminds me of Separate but Equal a little bit, I forget what they're called, but the big robotics league. It's mostly affluent schools. It's really expensive to get those programs. And then there's programs like Girls Who Code, and I've seen their programs, in action. And it's usually all, low income students of color. And I'm like, why? I'm hoping that the quality of these programs are equal, but I can't help but wonder, and so when we get asked by affluent communities, and even many individual parents as well, to come to their schools, I say, good. And I say, yes, we will. Not all of them, but 20% of them, because I want to demonstrate that, the student at the most affluent, prestigious private schools are going after and want the same content and learning experiences as these schools. And I think that should be true. So I'll just name that.
That's really interesting. And I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a second. And before I do that, I want to say I completely agree with you. And a little bit of behind the scenes with AI for anyone. We started off with a pure focus on schools that serve a high percentage of low income students. So we found that there was a lot of benefits to sort of broadening that scope. And now we serve just about any school that's interested in bringing us in for a workshop or in learning the basics of AI. So I completely agree with you there. But I think a lot of folks may say that there needs to be certain organizations that are meant to purely level the playing field. Now, in my mind, this seems like a bit of a misunderstanding of the situation, but I'm curious your thoughts on how you would respond to somebody that might say, the reason that a lot of organizations like Hello World should focus on low income students is so that they can help level the playing field. What would your response be to somebody that might say that?
This is so interesting to me. So I think it depends on your interpretation of leveling the playing field. Because when I hear that, I picture a very different world. This is what scares me. You have affluent students who are around peers that look just like them, mostly white, really rich, who never talk about things like ethics and low income communities and read articles about that or interact with the other students of color. When you level the playing field, it's not just about bringing this group up intellectually. It's about raising the social awareness and consciousness of the entire society. I'll give you a case in point, the Black Lives Matter movement. That's been going on forever. It didn't start, 4 or 5 years ago, but because of that movement, more and more people are aware and understanding that, yes, racism exists. I should be an anti-racist. I should play an active role in this society to raise other people up. So when you look at our curriculum, I'll give you a really, really concrete example. We have a project called the Bike Share Program, the high school data science AI project, where it took us a month to put this project together. We reached out to Indigo, which is a bike share program in Philadelphia. We said, give us your data. They gave us hundreds of thousands of lines of data. And we created a project where we tasked students to comb through this data and propose to the mayor of Philadelphia what kiosk they should build. Now, what bike share stations should they build? And they have a limited budget. You can only build 3. Here are 15 proposals. What would you do as the advisor and consultant to the mayor of Philadelphia? Now, we could have stopped there. It's a rigorous program. It's very challenging. You have to look at, commuter traffic between stations, who's using them? Are they, are these locals? Are they tourists? Like, who's using them? We could have stopped there. But instead, we now add another layer of social consciousness, awareness, ethics, and equity, where we said, now read these articles about the harms and benefits of bike share program. And what you come to realize is that there's a trend in the US to place these kiosks in places that are more favorable to tourists than even low-income communities. And it effectively does not help low-income communities commute to work when you don't have a car. And then because of this research, there are now partnerships happening with food stamp programs and bike share programs. If you have a food stamp card, you can use a bike share card, bike for free. Now, add that layer and bring this curriculum to affluent schools. That, to me, is a much more, impactful way of leveling the playing field. Let's stop ignoring the privileged students, because what I learned from the Black Lives Matter movement is that people do care. It is very difficult to watch someone in a chokehold lose their life you will elicit empathy. You will. And, that's what we're trying to do with our curriculum. So I think it is a mistake if you only go after students that you're like, we need to raise whatever. It's like, you need to go after everybody, and everyone needs to be talking to each other, and everyone needs to be raise their intellectual awareness on many different dimensions, not just computer science in isolation, but computer science with ethics.
Wow. I absolutely love that answer. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I completely agree with you as well. It's not like you're furthering the divide, you're actually getting everyone on the same page. And because Hello World is focusing on such a well rounded curriculum rather than just teaching pure skills with the absence of some of the more important topics like ethics, that it's very important for folks that are in more privileged positions to develop that empathy, develop a better understanding of how those biases may exist today and how they may be perpetuated. How they may be perpetuated through technologies like artificial intelligence. So, Sabina, I'm going to pause right there very quickly. So, I was planning on sort of wrapping up here, talking a little bit more about like the future. So, the future of Hello World, your thoughts on the future of education. I wanted to touch base and just make sure there wasn't any other aspect of Hello World or your background that you wanted to cover beforehand.
Nothing comes to mind. This has been a really fun conversation for me so far.
Yeah, likewise.
You're asking some really, really great questions.
This has been awesome so far, and so I'll jump into the questions about the future, and hopefully it won't be more than another 5-10 minutes. I would try to keep it under 45 minutes, but it's been a great conversation. So it's been close to an hour actually. Okay, so, Sabina, I want to talk a little bit more about the future of education, your thoughts on how computer science literacy might evolve, and also the future of Hello World. So, you mentioned why school districts have been slow to adopt computer science in certain jurisdictions. Now, what can students do if they don't have the tools or resources accessible to them to learn about computer science? What could students that might be listening to this show right now that are interested in pursuing computer science as an educational subject, what can they do today in order to either bring computer science into their school and have it taught to their classes or their fellow classmates, or to learn it on their own? What would you suggest to them?
Absolutely. Um, I'll answer the second question first, which is there are resources out there. My favorite is probably Khan Academy for K-12. I don't think it's been a huge focus for them, so there's not like a ton of projects like maybe you'll see in Khan Academy Math or something like that. But they do have some pretty rigorous projects on Khan Academy. I think Code.org is another one most folks are familiar with. But you know, the what I would say about learning it yourself, and I heard this from another speaker that we had at Hello World, is that find what drives you. Find the thing that you think is interesting related to computer science. You really got to think about that, because I said in the beginning, I was the kind of person that's like, I don't know what I care about. Let me just follow the herd and do well enough. So I'm kind of going against even what I did. But if you like reading stories about AI, read stories about AI. If you like, understanding what the latest research is, do that. If you like building programs and puzzling things out, do that. But don't just do it because you feel like you need to check it off the list. Find the part of it that you think is fascinating and really double down on that. Because what's neat about that, and kind of draws parallel to my pursuit of, equity in education, is that it won't feel forced. It'll feel like fun. So that's the piece I would say about doing it yourself. The second thing, and I think you alluded to this, Haroon, is just advocate for it. Advocate for it. I've seen students, the March for Our Lives movement. Students can make a tremendous difference in our society, in many cases more than policymakers. Advocate for it. Understand that it is it really can change the trajectory of your life and the lives of your peers and the lives of students that will go to your school after you. So advocate for rigorous computer science programs at your school.
Love it. And for any adults that might be listening to this show who might think that they're maybe over the hill here and they don't really have a need to learn about computer science, what would you say to those adults?
Yeah, this is tricky for me because I'm I don't feel like I'm in a position, right, to tell adults like you should do this. But what I'll share about computer science, even as adults, is that you get to understand how software works, and that is definitely very relevant in the tech space, all parts of the tech space, the design space, the product space, all of those roles. You really understand how software works. If you start experimenting with computer science, I'd also say there's a real joy in learning something challenging. As adults, myself included, we forget this. There's I believe he passed away not too long ago, but there was a professor at MIT, kind of a philosopher, education advocate and philosopher named Seymour Papert, and he believed in this concept of hard fun, which is where you understand that nothing is more rewarding and nothing is more gratifying than doing work that is challenging. And so, just keeping that in mind, I can see, folks really experiencing the joy of the challenge of computer science. The last thing I'll say for adults is they can build confidence, a real sense of pride and being able to build something worthwhile. Even if it's not obvious to you how you might apply it.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. And tell us a little bit more about the future of Hello World. Do you plan on offering a self-service option so folks can log in and go through the curriculum on their own without the sort of need to go through a formalized program? What are some things that are on the roadmap that you're especially excited about and that you're able to share with our audience?
So eventually, I would love for Hello World to be free and available to everyone. You need a pretty altruistic backer for that to happen, but I've seen it happen before. Um, but for now, our focus is schools, is K-12 schools, and I say that mainly because of selection bias. The students that are least likely to get it are the ones that the best way to reach them is through the school because they are in school. So the school is our first target audience. But yeah, I think in the future, I can definitely see us growing beyond that. But yeah, the focus right now is K-12 schools.
Okay, Sabina, so we have just a couple of rapid fire fun questions for you to answer. So if you had unlimited funds, what would you do with the money?
I mean, I can't help but think of Hello World, but I would hire a bunch of engineers, a bunch of product managers. I would build a ton of content. I would host a lot of conferences for teachers, and I would make it free, all of it.
Love it. Love it. And what is, or sorry, and the second question is, who is your favorite celebrity or a celebrity that you completely obsess over if you have one?
Favorite celebrity? I don't know if I have a favorite, but I will share someone that I'm a fan of. And this is funny, Haroon, because you know this person. I think you've worked with him or his team, but Mark Cuban is one of them. And I say that only because if you ever watch Shark Tank, it's anytime someone's like a real hustler, like they knock on doors, they go to door, they self-funded, they bootstrap, or like whatever it is, like they're like a real hustler. The camera always turns to Mark and gets his reaction because he loves it so much. Um, and I not that I am that person, but I try to be that person. I try. So yeah, I think it's pretty. It would be pretty neat to like see him speak in live or something like that.
Yeah, he has a way of getting people just very, very energized. I mean, he's as pure an entrepreneur as they come. Awesome. Well, Sabina, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Haroon. I appreciate it. Thank you.